Hip, forward, high. Hip, hip, hip. 2, 3, 4. Left, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, left. I mean, hop, 2, 3, 4. Up, left.
That's good. That's good. That's very good. All right, just keep on going.
When Johnny Comes Marching Home was popular with both the North and the South. Oh yeah, okay, you should sit down. Yeah, I'll start. Okay. When Johnny Comes When Johnny Comes Marching Home was popular with both the North and the South because it alluded to a time of peace when the soldiers would return home. It was written by Union Army bandmaster Patrick Sarfields Gilmore under the pseudonym of Louis Lambert. Gilmore might have learned the melody from an African American, as he once said. The other possibility is that he adapted it from an Irish folk song from his native country, Galway. So we start today in the heart of the Civil War, where it all began. California. California wasn't even in the Civil War. Was he, Esker?
There are those who don't believe that California was a part of the action involving the Civil War, but it was. California became a part of the United States as a result of the Mexican-American War of 1846 to 1848. Now, I won't go into a discussion of that war, except to say that we won, and Mexico lost. Soon after that, gold was, as they say, discovered at Sutter's Mill, and hundreds of thousands of people from many countries trekked into the state to seek their fame and fortune. Few achieved fame, fewer yet achieved their fortune. But still they came. Some who came envisioned California as a new market for slaves and saw them importing their own slaves to dig for gold in California. This was not to be, as the recently enacted state government enacted a state constitution that prohibited slavery. Still, the groups that schemed to have slavery also schemed to tie California to the south with a southern route transcontinental railroad and worked to split off half of California as a separate slave state. When the war did break out, there were efforts made to push California to leave the Union, but little came of that. Several noted Californians who had moved to the state from the South went off to the South to join the Confederate Army, while others tried as hard as they could to keep California gold from getting to the North and underwriting the war effort. Many battles were fought within the state of California relating to that, but none of them were actually fought with forces of either the Confederate or Union side. They were usually just miners and other people who were trying to take from one side to get to the other, etc. Just that. While it may sound strange, one of the ways that many of those who wish to mine gold travel to California was by boat. Now, you may think that's strange, but it's not, because the Transcontinental Railroad wasn't going to be shut to be built until 1863. There were a lot of trails taking settlers west, but not too many. It was, when you went by boat, not as easy as it is today. It could take up to 8 months to travel from New York City to San Francisco around the tip of South America. A faster way was developed through Panama, with the building in Panama by Americans of a railroad across the isthmus. This shortened the time by months, but records that I have read talk mainly about that train as being for goods and services and not for passengers. Also at this time, one can envision how the Gold Rush influenced the Kansas-Nebraska Act and the repeal of the Missouri Compromise, with the northern side gaining the upper hand on the question of not allowing slavery into the new territories. Mr. Pershing will talk of that.
Thank you, Esther. Esther mentioned the Missouri Compromise and Nebraska-Kansas Compromise. Both of those were very important. The Missouri Compromise said that all the land that had been in Louisiana purchased would be free, with the exception of Missouri, and it was a slave state. The Nebraska-Kansas Act, or Compromise, said that the territory of Kansas and Nebraska was a sovereign state, that they could vote whether they had slavery or whether not. Well, those pesky Missourians, there were 1,700 people that could actually legally vote in Kansas. Would you believe they had 6,500 votes? Now that's where Illinois gets their things today, is they not only vote from other countries, they pick up the dead. Now, away from that, Kansas, the border states through there, were at least 1 day ride from any law. And the Army was the only law in the territories. Kansas came up with the Jayhawkers. The Jayhawkers were nothing more than a vigilante group that made up their own laws as they went along. Missouri, not to be outdone, came up with the Bushwhackers. The Bushwhackers were Jayhawkers on the other side of the river. From 1950 up to when the war started, 1850, sorry, I got 100 years in there. There is estimated that over 2,000 women and children were killed in the Kansas area alone. Kansas got a little bit upset about that, so they started raiding into Missouri. Anybody that showed any slavery leanings, they would confiscate their land, put their women in prison. Now that caused another problem. The ladies in prison were in Kansas City. They were in a big old mansion. The mansion fell down. My goodness, and 8 women were killed. This caused a little bit of trouble with some of the Missourians, because some of the people that were killed were relatives of Quantrell, of Jesse and Frank James, the Daltons, and the Youngers. Later on, you'll hear about them again. We all have heard about the Lawrence raid and the time that everybody got killed. 9 years before Quantrell raided Lawrence, the Bushwhackers from Missouri came in. 800 of them slipped into Kansas, where Kansas University now sits. It's called Mount Olympus. The people were there. That's where they congregated before they had their initial raid on Lawrence. That raid, there was only one person killed, and he was a pro-slavery man. They destroyed the town with the exception of the hotel. And the reason they didn't destroy the hotel, they think that was their brothel. Now, Kansas, with the thing they had a legislature, 2 of them. One of them was called the bogus legislature, from when they had the election. Now, here is an interesting fact. They passed over 1,000 laws in 1 month about slavery. 1,000 pages. And that was done without computers, without copiers, without typewriters, or without secretaries. Amazing. The legal or the other free staters, they passed their legislation and said that women would have the vote and that the blacks would have the vote. Well, the people here in Washington knew better than both of them people, so they done away with both of them. Neither one of the constitutions were in. Well, I've ran out of time. I could speak up here for another hour, but I've ran out of time. And I'm going to turn this over to my good friend, what's his name, Bill W. Oh, Joe, here you are.
Very good. You guys are doing well. This is.
I forgot my glasses, so you're gonna have to bear with me on this.
This might be the day of, and that's fine.
Yeah, that's
Can
right.
you use reading glasses? I got some.
That might help, yeah. Because I'm gonna have to lay this down when I start handling the pistol.
Here, how about Miss Chris?
You got Coke bottle glasses?
No, not quite. Not yet.
And those have lights on them if you want.
No, I don't think I need those.
Oh, those kind, oh, yeah. Those are meeting glasses.
Are they work? Do they work for you?
Oh, yeah, that works. Now, my original plan was to discuss the development of firearms during the period of the Civil War, 1861 to 1865. However, or forever changed warfare. However, during my research, I discovered that the field covered so much material that I could keep you here literally for hours trying to cover it all, inasmuch that between North and South, there were over a dozen different revolvers, not to mention a number of single-shot pistols, and no less than 37 different models of muskets, carbines, and rifles, many of them of different calibers, a supply-side nightmare. So to spare you, I've narrowed my discussion to one of the most popular handguns, not only of the Civil War, but still today a much sought-after collector's item, namely the 36 caliber, 6-shot, 1851 Colt Navy revolver. Over 220,000 were produced through 1873, plus another 35,000 copies of this model by other copycat manufacturers. Now, the Civil War coincided with a time of great industrial development. Railroads, the telegraph, improved iron and metal manufacture, mostly in the North, steam power had become reasonably reliable, and many other changes. This included great improvement in firearms design and manufacture. The first machine gun, the Gatling, in 1862. The first successful breech-loading rifles. The rapid development of repeating rifles. The first breech-loading cannon. The invention of the mini-ball, a highly accurate, expanding bullet that created nasty and often deadly wounds. And the improvement and development of the cartridge as we know it today. Before anyone gets nervous about people being handled here, this is not a real fireable weapon. It is a semi-functioning model of the Navy Colt. If I were to load this thing, point it at you and pull the trigger, you would be perfectly safe. My hand would be a mess. Now, from the early 1850s through 1871, Smith & Wesson had the patent on the bored-through cylinder, where you loaded it in the back and then just continued to use it. This allowed them the exclusive use of a preloaded cartridge. However, their design of the hinge, which allowed the barrel to tilt up for loading, was so weak that they were reduced to minor calibers, 22, 30, 32, which were not effective man-stoppers. And the possession of that patent forced manufacturers to continue using the standard of the time. A cylinder, open at the muzzle, but closed at the breech, with a nipple, which you put a cap on, which ignited the charge inside. So here we have the 36 caliber, 6-shot Colt 1851 Navy revolver. By the time of the Civil War, the sword had ceased to be a primary personal defense weapon. It was used to denote officers or senior enlisted non-coms, and was mostly used for signaling, such as charge or form up on me. The revolver, because it could fire several shots before reloading, was most commonly used by officers or the cavalry or anybody else who could or should have one. However, let me illustrate how they were loaded. You poured the powder in through the muzzle end of the cylinder, put in a patch to hold the powder in place. This, on a real revolver, would revolve down, pushing the rammer into the chamber to push it down. Then you would add the ball, and then another patch, which you would ram down. In inclement weather, you could use grease to keep moisture from coming in. Or if you were in a rush, you could just put in the powder, the ball, ram it down, and get ready to fire. However, in that case, sometimes the powder residue at the muzzle end would be exposed enough to where the flash of one chamber could ignite the other chamber and get multiple discharges. Not good for either the weapon or your hand. And because they were so cumbersome to load, especially the cavalry troopers would carry 3, 4, in some occasions even 6 revolvers stuck in their belt. Now, who'd want to take the time to load one in the middle of a firefight? Also, as a rule, only 5 of the 6 chambers were loaded. I leave it to your imagination if you had a loaded chamber and a cap stuck in your belt riding over rough terrain on a horse, what might happen if it inadvertently went off. It wasn't until 1871, when the patent for Smith & Wesson ran out, that other manufacturers were allowed to use the bored-through cylinder, and that started a whole new development of the revolver. But that's the subject of another talk. And for one little point, for some reason, 25,000 rifles manufactured in Massachusetts ended up in Confederate hands. Now, how that happened, who knows, but perhaps Bill will answer that question.
The Civil War in Maryland was indeed, the Civil War in Maryland was indeed a civil war. The people of Maryland were divided into opposing factions on both sides of the conflict. They disagreed over several subjects, including slavery. But the critical issue at that time was secession. Some did not favor secession, but they did not want to go to war against their sister state of Virginia. If Maryland were to secede and join the Confederacy after Virginia had done so, the capital of the United States would be surrounded by enemy territory. Abraham Lincoln could not allow this to happen. While the Maryland legislators were deliberating over the issue, he seized the state of Maryland by military force and prevented the legislators from entering the State House until legislators favoring the Union were ready to take action. He also placed the city of Baltimore under military occupation, suspended the right of habeas corpus, and allowed trials by military courts-martial of civilians. Many of the people were outraged at this. My great-grandfather, Martin McGraw, was an Irish immigrant. He is reported to have said, "I might as well have stayed in Ireland as to live in a country where the government could send armed soldiers in to keep the people from voting for what they wanted." He therefore decided to take the side of the Confederacy and made contact with Confederate Army officers. His wife, Susan, had a cousin, Cousin Ellen, who was married to a Confederate officer. His name was Eustace Huger, and his father was a famous Confederate general, Benjamin Huger, and at the time, he was the commander of the coastal areas of Virginia and North Carolina. Martin McGraw was a dairyman. He would meet British blockade runners on the shores of Maryland waterways in the dark of night and receive certain rifles or carbines which, when broken down, would fit into the milk cans on his wagon. He would then deliver the weapons to Confederate irregulars at the Virginia border. He was ultimately captured by Union soldiers and threatened with hanging. It was reported in the family that a British consul intervened, saying in effect, you can't hang an Irishman for treason against the United States because he isn't a citizen of the United States. He's a British subject. He was released at the end of the war, was married, had a few children, and died soon after. Unknown to Martin McGraw was another Irish immigrant family in Baltimore, the O'Boys. They were on the Union side. My great-grandmother, named O'Boy, was friendly toward the Union troops, and as a young lady, she used to attend dances in Baltimore that were put on by probably an organization similar to our USOs or something of that sort, where they were attended by Union soldiers. And she favored the Union side. In succeeding generations, this family remained divided in their sentiments about the war. I myself am on both sides. I'm a Confederate sympathizer to the extent that I sympathize with my great-grandfather and his compatriots for their loyalty to their states and their neighboring states, and their fighting for whatever cause they believed in. On the other hand, I'm glad that Abraham Lincoln won, preserved the Union, and freed the slaves. All my relatives felt the same way about Lincoln, but in each generation there were still opposing sides. In my own generation, my sister, who lived in Maryland for many years, told me that there are still many people in Maryland who have strong feelings about the Civil War. And they refer to families like ours, some of whom were Confederate sympathizers, as copperheads. The copperhead is a treacherous, sneaky snake which strikes without warning. And you'll hear that word again in an authentic letter from a member of another family who was active in the war. And Christine will tell you about that.
These are selected excerpts from 43 letters written from the brother of one of my great-great-great-grandfathers, George A. Breckinridge, to his family during the Civil War. I would like to thank resident John Shepard, who helped to compile them for this presentation. From letter number 1, Rochester, Pennsylvania, April 19, 1862. Dear Sister Mary, I received your letter containing $5 yesterday, for which received my thanks. Today, that would be worth $116. From letter number 3, Camp Rough, Camden, New Jersey, September 28, 1862. Dear Father and the rest, I will first describe our tent and how we live in it. It is in the shape of a rooftop of a house, about 7 feet from the cone to the ground and about 8 feet square on the ground. It is made of heavy canvas, sufficient to turn the water. On the outside, a trench is dug around to carry off the water. From letter number 13, Camp 96, New Iberia, Louisiana, November 25th, 1862. Dear Sister Mary, I now write on my knee. The other boys are employed in building fires to sit around, as it is very raw and cold and has been for some time. We cannot take anything along on our expedition excepting a woolen and rubber blanket and a change of shirt and socks. Since the capture of Vicksburg, our expedition was ordered to New Orleans to join General Banks on an extended campaign without giving us 1 minute rest. From letter number 23, Benton Barracks, St. Louis, Missouri, February 28, 1863. Dear Father and Mother, the two principal papers here are the St. Louis Democrat and the St. Louis Republican. There is a peculiarity about them that the one that is called the Democrat is the Republican paper, and the other is called the Democrat, and it has succession ideas. But later, it has been disgusted with Northern peacemen and Southern fire eaters, and it advocates a vigorous war. Speaking of newspapers, reminds me of copperheads. I would tell you now I hate copperheads, or otherwise peacemen. I would pull the rope that would hang a few hundred of them. I'm surprised to find out how the soldiers here are in hatred of those who would win the country by an ignoramus peace. The men who have had to endure the hardships and shed their blood in this war are not the ones to cry peace. From letter number 43, Floating Hospital, Woodford, July 29, 1863. Dear parents, I write you this under rather unfavorable circumstances. My health, on account of the war weather and inferior food, began to fail again. Thinking that a change onto the hospital boat might be beneficial, I came aboard about a week ago. You cannot expect to receive long letters from me at present. I've only got 3 stamps left and no chance to buy any. Please send 8 or 10 next mail. Hoping to write better news in my next letter, I remain your affectionate son, George. 11 days later, the death certificate reads, George A. Breckenridge, enlisted in Louisiana Volunteer Heavy Artillery, 152nd Regiment, transferred to something Marine Brigade, Steamer Baltic, died the 9th of August, 1863, aged 22 years, 27 days, in Floating Hospital, Woodford. And now we're going to find out another true story, hopefully, about a close relative of Roger Polhemus. And then when he's done, he'll say something like, and war is always difficult and there are rules that need to be applied. But we're going to tell you a little bit about Murphy's laws.
Good, okay.
As you might notice, I am not Lloyd. Thank you. As you notice, I'm not Lloyd Byman. Lloyd compiled these, and I kind of added one to him. He's talking about Murphy's Law and how everything that can go wrong will go wrong. I'm going to take this clear back to Jericho. The Battle of Jericho had to be won with horns because the spears all broke. You didn't know that, did you? Okay. The first one is, you are not Superman. Recently graduated recruits from Marine Boot Camp, Army Jump School, Ranger School, fighter pilots, and especially take note, you're not Superman. Suppressive fire, it don't. If it's stupid and works, it's not stupid. Don't be conspicuous, it draws fire. When in doubt, empty the magazine. Never share a foxhole with somebody as braver than you are. Never forget, Your weapon was made by the lowest bidder. If your attack is going too well, it's probably an ambush. No plan survives the first contact intact. Boy, that's hard on the tongue. All 5 second grenade bombs go off 3 seconds after you light them. Try not to look important. The bad guys may be low on ammo. If you are forward of your position, the artillery will fall short. The enemy diversion that you're ignoring is the main attack. The important things are always simple. And the simple things are always important. You are short of everything except the enemy. You're in combat. Incoming fire has the right of way. No combat-ready unit has ever passed inspection. Think about that. If you're ready, they're going to come after you. If the enemy is within range, so are you. Now here's something that goes back further than Jericho. It takes, if there's 2 men and 2 drinks for 17 men equates to a full wagon load of beer or wine or whatever we had years and years ago. I'm reading this one from today. Body count in math is 3 gorillas, 1 probable, 2 pigs equals 37 enemy. We'll lock that one out. That needs to. Friendly fire, it isn't. Things that must go together to work together.